The fungus pit bursts open with a wet tearing sound that echoes through the breeding cavern, and something small and screaming claws its way into existence. This is not birth as humans understand it, not the gentle emergence of new life into waiting hands, but rather a violent expulsion from spore-infected earth. The thing that will eventually be called Ricket emerges covered in soil and fungal matter, its oversized head forcing itself through the torn opening in the ground, while its spindly limbs scratch uselessly at the surrounding dirt. Around him, dozens of other Gretchen are emerging from similar pits, each one fighting its way into consciousness with the same desperate panic that characterizes their species. Their first moments of life are spent in frantic struggle, their sharp little teeth already gnashing at the air, their clawed fingers already grasping for purchase. This is the way of things in Orc society, where even the weakest members of the green-skinned species must prove their will to survive from the moment of their creation. The breeding pit where Ricket emerges is located deep within the bowels of a massive Orc warship, one of hundreds of such vessels that make up Warboss Gutsrip's fleet. The ship itself is a monument to Orc engineering philosophy, a collection of stolen Imperial cruisers, looted Eldar components, and countless tons of scrap metal welded together with such enthusiasm that the resulting structure defies both physics and common sense. It stays in the void through sheer Orc belief that it should, its engines producing thrust through processes that would make any tech priest weep. But Ricket knows none of this as he pulls himself from the earth. His awareness is limited to immediate sensations, the cold air on his wet skin, the smell of other Gretchen nearby, the instinctive knowledge that he must move or be trampled by the larger forms already casting shadows across the breeding chamber. His eyes, large and bulbous, even by Grot standards, struggle to focus in the dim light provided by guttering torches that line the walls. The first thing he sees clearly is another Gretchen, slightly larger than himself, already standing upright on its runty legs. This other Grot is examining its own hands with something approaching wonder, flexing its fingers and testing the strength of its grip. Then it notices Ricket watching, and its expression changes instantly from curiosity to aggression. It leaps forward with a snarl, its teeth bared, and Ricket's body responds before his mind can process what is happening. He rolls to the side, his movements uncoordinated but effective, and the attacking Grot crashes into the space where he had been moments before. The attacker recovers quickly, turning with surprising speed, but by then, Ricket has managed to gain his feet. His legs feel wrong, too short and weak to support his oversized head, but they hold him upright long enough for him to bare his own teeth in response. The two Gretchens circle each other for a moment, their postures mimicking fighting stance they have never been taught, but somehow know instinctively. Around them, other newly emerged Grots are engaged in similar conflicts, the breeding chamber filled with the sounds of screeching and snarling as the latest generation of Orc servants establishes its pecking order. This is normal, this is expected, this is how Gretchen society functions from the very beginning. Then a shadow falls across both of them and they freeze. The shadow belongs to an Orc, not a full-grown warrior, but a young one still growing into his strength. He is perhaps twice Ricket's height and many times his weight, his green skin already showing the thick muscle that will eventually make him a proper Orc boy. In one massive hand, he carries a stick with a crackling electrical prod attached to its end, the kind of implement known throughout Orc society as a Grot prod. The young Orc grins, revealing tusks that could tear either Gretchen in half with a single bite, and he jabs the prod toward the nearest Grot. The electrical discharge catches the creature mid-snarl, and it collapses with a squeal that sounds almost like laughter. The Orc's grin widens as he turns his attention to the rest of the newly emerged Gretchen, his prod dancing through the air with casual menace. This is how Ricket learns his first lesson about life in Orc society. He is small, he is weak, and he exists at the mercy of beings so much larger and stronger that resistance is not merely futile, but incomprehensible. The concept of fighting back against an orc never enters his developing consciousness because such thoughts have no framework in which to exist. Orcs are simply a fact of existence, as fundamental and unchangeable as gravity or hunger. The young orc herds the Gretchen together with his prod, shocking any who move too slowly or in the wrong direction. Ricket learns quickly to watch the orc's movements, to anticipate where the prod will strike next, to position himself among the other grots in ways that reduce his chances of being targeted. This is intelligence of a sort, low cunning that will serve him well if he survives long enough to develop it further. The Gretchen mob, perhaps 50 individuals in total, is driven through corridors that reek of machine oil and unwashed orc. The ship's interior is a maze of passages welded together from different sources, some wide enough for orcs to walk comfortably, while others require the grots to scramble through gaps barely larger than their heads. Everywhere there is noise, the constant background roar of engines and machinery, the shouting of orcs, the squealing of squigs being herded toward feeding pens. They pass through a section where orc mech boys are working on some massive project, a gun barrel the size of a battle tank being welded to a platform that already holds 3 similar weapons. The mechs barely glance at the passing Gretchen, their attention focused entirely on their work, but their assistants notice. Older grots, veterans who have survived months or even years in orc service, they watch the new arrivals with expressions that might be pity, or contempt, or simple recognition of what they themselves once were. One of these veterans, his skin marked with old burn scars and his ears torn from some past accident, catches Ricket's eye as the mob passes. There is something in that gaze, some attempt at communication that Ricket's newly formed mind cannot quite interpret. Warning, perhaps, or acknowledgement, or simply the reflection of one doomed creature recognizing another. Then the mob moves on, and the moment passes, and Ricket does not think of it again for a long time. The herding continues until they reach a vast chamber that serves as the ship's primary grot warren. This is where the Gretchen population lives when not actively serving their orc masters, a sprawling network of small tunnels and chambers carved into the spaces too small or awkward for orcs to occupy. The entrance is guarded by a Runthard, an orc who has taken on the dubious task of managing the ship's Gretchen population in exchange for a position that keeps him away from frontline fighting. The Runthard is old by orc standards, his skin darker green than the younger warriors, his body marked with scars that speak of decades of violence survived. He carries a grot prod similar to the young orcs, but larger and more elaborate, its electrical field crackling with enough power to kill a Gretchen, rather than merely stun it. Around his waist hangs a collection of metal tags, each one representing a grot that has achieved some level of competence in his service. He looks over the newly arrived Gretchen with an expression of professional assessment, his small eyes evaluating each individual with the practiced eye of someone who has processed thousands of grots over his career. Some he nods at with apparent approval, noting their size or the sharpness of their teeth. Others he dismisses with a grunt of disgust, already marking them in his mind as disposable resources to be spent in the most dangerous tasks. When his gaze falls on Ricket, he pauses for a moment longer than usual. Ricket is neither the largest nor the smallest of the new arrivals, but there is something about the way he holds himself, the way his eyes track the Runthard's movements with focused attention that seems to register in the orc's consciousness. The Runthard grunts, a sound that might mean anything or nothing, and then he begins his speech. The speech is delivered in the guttural language of the orcs, but somehow Ricket understands it, the knowledge of how to speak and comprehend this tongue already present in his newly formed brain. This is another mystery of orcoid reproduction, the way genetic memory transfers itself through spores, allowing even the youngest Gretchen to function within orc society, from the moment of emergence. The Runtherd's speech is simple, direct, and delivered with the casual brutality that characterizes all Orc communication. The Gretchen are now his property, he explains, to be assigned to whatever tasks serve the war boss's great plans. Some will work in the ship's engine rooms, maintaining machinery that would kill an Orc through sheer tedium even if the actual danger didn't. Others will serve in the kitchens, preparing the fungus beer and roasted squig that form the basis of Orc cuisine. Still others will become attendants to specific Orcs, personal servants who fetch and carry and absorb the casual violence that their masters need to express to maintain proper Orky attitudes. And some, the Runtherd continues with a grin that shows every one of his massive teeth, will be taken into battle. They will be driven forward ahead of the Orc warriors, their small bodies used to trigger enemy mines or draw defensive fire. They will die in numbers that make no sense to beings that understand individual worth, their lives spent as carelessly as ammunition because that is exactly what they are. Resources to be expended in pursuit of a good fight. Rickett listens to all of this without emotional response because he has no framework for understanding that his existence might be valued differently. The concept of individual rights, of personal worth, of life having intrinsic meaning beyond service. These ideas do not exist in the consciousness of a newly emerged Gretchen. He understands only that he must serve, and that service involves tasks that may or may not result in his death, and that this is simply the way things are. The mob is broken up into smaller groups, each assigned to different areas of the ship under the supervision of more experienced Grots who have earned enough trust to serve as overseers. Rickett finds himself in a group of 10, led by a Gretchen whose left arm ends in a crude mechanical replacement that clicks and whirs with every movement. This veteran, who goes by the name of Mechnik, has survived 3 years in the service of Orc mech boys, an achievement that speaks to either exceptional competence or extraordinary luck. Mechnik leads the group deeper into the warren, through passages so narrow that they must proceed single file, their hands and feet finding purchase on walls that were never designed for easy passage. The air becomes thicker as they descend, heavy with the smell of machinery and unwashed Grot bodies. They pass other Gretchen moving in the opposite direction, veterans returning from their shifts in whatever service they have been assigned, their bodies marked with fresh injuries or stains that might be blood or oil or both. Finally, they emerge into a small chamber that serves as living quarters for their group. The space is barely large enough for all 10 to lie down simultaneously, its walls dripping with condensation from the pipes that run overhead. There are no beds, no furniture beyond a few pieces of scrap metal that might serve as makeshift tools or weapons. This is home, such as the concept exists for Gretchen, and Rickett will spend what passes for his rest periods here for as long as he survives. Mechnik explains their duties with the same clinical detachment that the Runtherd displayed. They are assigned to the forward gun decks, where Orc weapons teams maintain the massive cannons that line the ship's prow. Their job will be to fetch ammunition, carry away shell casings, clean the barrels after firing, and perform the hundreds of small tasks that keep the guns operational. It is not the worst assignment a Grot can receive, Mechnik explains, because the Orcs who work the guns are too focused on their weapons to spend much time beating their assistants. But it is also not safe, because when the ship enters combat, the gun decks become priority targets for enemy fire. The first shift begins immediately. There is no rest period for newly emerged Gretchen, no gradual introduction to their duties. They are herded toward the gun decks at a run, Mechnik using his mechanical arm to grab and drag any who fall behind. The corridors they traverse are filled with activity now. Orcs rushing toward battle stations with expressions of eager anticipation, their weapons ready and their voices raised in war cries that shake the walls. The gun deck where Rickett is assigned stretches for hundreds of meters along the ship's port side, a vast space dominated by massive cannon barrels that protrude through armored ports toward the void beyond. Each gun position is manned by a crew of 3 orcs, muscular warriors who treat their weapons with more care than they show their own offspring. Around each crew swarms a support team of Gretchen, perhaps 20 grots per gun, all engaged in the constant work of keeping the weapons ready. Ricket's position is at the rear of gun position 7, where his job is to haul ammunition crates from the magazine lift to the loading area. The crates are nearly as large as he is, made from thick metal that conducts cold from the ammunition inside. Each one requires all of his strength to move, and he must complete the journey from lift to gun without dropping it or slowing down, because the orcs have no patience for Gretchen, who cannot keep pace with their demands. He learns the routine through watching other grots and through the occasional corrective violence when he makes mistakes. The work is physically exhausting, his weak legs struggling to support both his own weight and the weight of the ammunition he carries. His hands develop blisters within the first hour, the tough grot skin wearing away where it grips the metal handles of the crates. But there is no option to rest, no possibility of complaint, because the alternative to working is death. Around him, other Gretchen are engaged in their own tasks. Some clean spent shell casings, using tools that seem to have been designed for creatures 3 times their size. Others scramble along the gun barrels themselves, applying grease to moving parts or clearing away debris that accumulates during firing. Still others simply stand ready to throw themselves onto any mechanical problem that develops, their bodies used as living tools when no other solution presents itself quickly enough. The orcs who crew the gun barely acknowledge their Gretchen support team's existence except when something goes wrong. When a shell case gets stuck in the breach, it is a grot who must climb inside the still hot mechanism to clear the jam, his flesh sizzling against metal while the orcs shout encouragement or threats depending on their mood. When a loading mechanism fails, it is Gretchen who must manually haul shells that weigh more than they do, their small bodies straining with effort that seems physically impossible until it is somehow accomplished. Ricket works for what might be hours or days, his sense of time quickly losing meaning in the constant cycle of fetch and carry. His muscles scream, his hands bleed, his oversized head pounds with pain that he has no words to describe. But he continues because stopping means drawing attention, and attention from orcs means pain or death or both. So he keeps moving, keeps working, keeps existing in the small space between too slow and too fast where Gretchen might survive. Then the alarm sounds, a klaxon that echoes through the gun deck with tooth-rattling volume. The orcs respond instantly, their casual roughness transforming into focused efficiency as they begin final checks on their weapons. The Gretchen scatter to their positions, each grot knowing exactly where they need to be when the guns begin firing. Ricket finds himself pressed against the bulkhead behind gun position 7, his body crammed into a space between the wall and a massive ammunition hopper. Combat, when it comes, is nothing like the glorious battles described in Imperial propaganda, or even in orc war stories. From Ricket's perspective, it is simply noise and violence that happens around him while he tries to remain unseen and unharmed. The ship shudders as enemy fire strikes its hull, the impacts transmitted through every surface as vibrations that rattle his teeth. The guns respond, their firing sequences so loud that Ricket feels his internal organs compress with each shot. The orcs are screaming now, their war cries mixing with the thunder of artillery to create a wall of sound that seems solid enough to touch. They feed shells into their weapons with mechanical precision, their movements choreographed through countless previous battles. When a weapon jams, they swear and kick at it until it functions again, and if that doesn't work, they grab the nearest Gretchen and throw it at the problem with instructions to fix it or die trying. One of Ricket's fellow grots, a slightly larger individual named Scritch, is grabbed by one of the orc gunners and hurled toward a smoking breach mechanism. Scritch disappears into the machinery with a terrified squeal, and for a moment there is no sound from inside the gun. Then the mechanism cycles. The jam clears, and when Scritch emerges, his right arm is gone, torn away by moving parts that cared nothing for the flesh in their path. He staggers 2 steps before collapsing, his life bleeding out onto the deck in dark spurts that quickly mix with the oil and coolant already coating the floor. None of the orcs notice. They are already firing again, their attention focused entirely on whatever enemy vessel they are engaging beyond the ship's hull. The other Gretchen step over Scritch's body without pause, their work continuing because stopping would mean drawing the attention that killed him. This is the calculus of Grot survival, the cold mathematics that determines who lives and who dies based on factors that have nothing to do with worth or skill or deserving. Rickett watches Scritch die with the same detachment that he might watch a piece of machinery break. There is no grief because there is no framework for grief, no concept that this other Gretchen's death means anything beyond one less body competing for limited resources. Later, when the battle ends, other Grots will come to collect the corpse, dragging it away to whatever fate awaits dead Gretchen in Orc society. But for now, Scritch simply lies on the deck, his blood pooling around the ammunition that Rickett continues to haul from magazine to gun. The battle lasts for what might be hours, though Rickett has no way to measure time beyond the number of ammunition crates he has carried. His body moves on autopilot now, his conscious mind retreating somewhere deep inside where the pain and exhaustion cannot reach. This is another survival mechanism that Gretchen possess, the ability to disconnect from immediate suffering and simply function until circumstances change or death arrives. When the guns finally fall silent, when the orcs' war cries fade to satisfied grunts and the ship stops shuddering from impacts, the work does not end. Now comes the cleanup, the process of preparing the guns for the next engagement. Shell casings must be collected and sorted. The guns must be cleaned and greased. The deck must be cleared of debris, both mechanical and biological. The Gretchen swarm over the work area like insects, their small hands performing tasks that would be beneath the notice of any orc. Rickett's first battle leaves him changed in ways he cannot articulate. He is more tired than he has ever been, his muscles shaking with exhaustion that goes beyond physical limits. But he is also still alive, which is itself a kind of victory in Gretchen terms. He has learned something about how to position himself during combat, where to stand to minimize the risk of being grabbed and thrown at problems. This knowledge might keep him alive through the next engagement, or it might prove useless when circumstances shift, but it is all he has. The cycle continues. Work periods blend together, each one a repetition of the same tasks performed under the same threatening supervision. Fetch ammunition, haul crates, clean weapons, avoid attention. These become the defining activities of Rickett's existence, the framework within which his consciousness operates. Days pass, or weeks, or months. Time has no meaning beyond the alternation of work and sleep, battle and cleanup. Other Gretchen die around him with regularity that makes each death meaningless. Some are killed by the orcs in fits of frustration, their bodies broken by blows delivered with casual strength. Others are caught by malfunctioning machinery, crushed or burned or torn apart by mechanisms that continue functioning regardless of the flesh trapped in their moving parts. Still others simply disappear, taken away for reasons that are never explained and never returned. But Rickett survives, and survival is itself a form of success in this environment. He learns to read the orcs' moods, to know when a particular warrior is building toward violence and needs to express it through beating the nearest Gretchen. He learns which other Grots can be trusted to work together and which are likely to push him into danger to save themselves. He learns the 1,000 small tricks that make the difference between life and death when margins are measured in seconds and inches. He also begins to understand the broader structure of the ship's society, the complex hierarchy that governs interactions between different orcs and their Gretchen servants. The gun crews he serves are part of a larger group loyal to a knob named Scarfang. who in turn serves one of the war boss's primary lieutenants. This chain of authority extends upward through levels of increasing violence and power, ending with war boss Gutsrip himself, whose will dictates the fate of every being aboard the vessel. Rickett never sees the war boss directly, but his presence is felt throughout the ship in the way that gravity is felt without being seen. Every decision, every order, every action taken by every Orc and Gretchen aboard exists in service to whatever grand plans Gutsrip has conceived. The ship itself is merely one tool in the war boss's arsenal, sailing through the void toward whatever battles or conquests or simple violence he has chosen as his current objective. Months into his service, Rickett is selected for a new assignment. This comes without warning or explanation, as most things do in Gretchen existence. He is simply grabbed by a different Runthud during a shift change and dragged away from his gun crew toward a different section of the ship. His attempts to understand what is happening, to ask questions or seek clarity, are met with blows from the Runthud's Grot prod that leave him twitching on the deck until he learns to simply comply. The new assignment takes him deep into the ship's engineering sections, where massive reactors provide the power that keeps the vessel functional. The heat here is intense, the air thick with fumes that make breathing painful. Other Gretchens swarm through the spaces like insects, their bodies covered in burns and chemical stains that mark them as veterans of this particular hell. His new overseer is a Gretchen named Gripsit, whose survival through 5 years of engineering work has earned him a position of relative authority. Gripsit is larger than most Grots, his body twisted by exposure to radiation and chemicals into something that barely resembles the Gretchen form. One eye has grown to 3 times normal size, while the other has shriveled to a useless nub. His skin shows patches where fur grows in unnatural colors, blue and orange and purple patterns that seem to shift when viewed from different angles. Gripsit explains the work with mechanical efficiency. The reactors must be monitored constantly, their countless gauges and readouts checked according to schedules that make no sense to anyone except the mech boys who designed them. When readings fall outside acceptable parameters, Gretchen must make adjustments by manipulating controls that are often located in areas filled with deadly radiation or explosive gases. The survival rate for engineering Grots is approximately 3 months, Gripsit explains without emotion, though some individuals last longer through luck or mutation into forms that can tolerate the environment. This assignment is considered punishment by most Gretchen, a sentence of slow death through exposure to forces that gradually break down the body until it can no longer function. But Rickett approaches it with the same detachment he has applied to everything else in his existence. He will work until he dies or until circumstances change, and speculation about which outcome is more likely seems pointless when he has no control over either. The work in engineering is different from gun deck duties, but equally exhausting in its own way. Instead of physical labor that strains muscles and joints, this is work that attacks the body at a cellular level. Radiation exposure causes his fur to fall out in patches, the skin beneath showing burns that never fully heal. Chemical spills leave scars that ache when the temperature changes. His vision begins to blur in his right eye, and his left hand develops a tremor that makes fine motor control difficult. But he also learns things that Gretchen assigned to other sections never discover. He learns how the ship's systems interconnect, how power flows from reactors through distribution networks to the weapons and engines and life support that keep the massive vessel functional. He learns to recognize the sounds that different machinery makes when it is operating correctly versus when it is beginning to fail. He learns which mech boys are competent and which are simply enthusiastic, and how to avoid being caught in the catastrophic failures that enthusiasm without competence inevitably produces. And he learns about the Waaagh, that mysterious force that drives all Orc society toward endless conflict. The mech boys talk about it sometimes when they think the Gretchen aren't listening or are too stupid to understand, or simply don't care if their servants overhear. The Waaagh is something in the orc mind, a psychic pressure that builds when enough greenskins gather together and think about fighting. It is what makes orc technology function when by all logic it should fail. What allows their guns to fire and their ships to fly despite being assembled from scrap and faith and violence. Rickett understands none of this on an intellectual level, but he feels it sometimes in the way the ship seems to respond to the orcs' moods. When battle is imminent and the warriors are excited, the engines run smoother and the weapons charge faster. When the orcs are bored and frustrated by the lack of fighting, systems break down more frequently and repairs become more necessary. It is as if the ship itself shares the orcs' emotional state, responding to their desires through mechanisms that have nothing to do with conventional engineering. During his 4th month in engineering, something happens that will change the trajectory of Rickett's existence. The ship encounters an asteroid field while cruising through an uninhabited system, and the mech boys decide this is an excellent opportunity to test a new weapons system they have been developing. The weapon, a massive mining laser repurposed for combat, requires an enormous power draw from the ship's reactors to function. Gripsit receives orders to divert power from life support and secondary systems to feed the weapon, a process that involves manually reconfiguring dozens of circuits and relays throughout the engineering section. He organizes the available Gretchen into teams, assigning each group specific tasks with instructions to complete them simultaneously when he gives the signal. Rickett finds himself part of a 3-Grot team tasked with shutting down power to the starboard crew quarters and redirecting that energy to weapon systems. The job requires climbing into a relay station that is barely large enough to contain 1 Gretchen, let alone 3. The space is hot enough to cause burns on contact with any exposed skin and filled with exposed electrical connections that arc and spark with deadly potential. The other 2 Grots on Rickett's team, both newer arrivals to engineering with less than a month of service, hesitate at the entrance to the relay station, their survival instincts warring with their fear of disobeying orders. Rickett does not hesitate. His months of survival have taught him that the only way forward is through, that stopping to consider danger or fear or the possibility of death is itself a form of death. He climbs into the relay station without pause, his small hands finding purchase on surfaces too hot to hold, his body contorting to fit through spaces that seem too small for passage. Behind him, shamed by his example or simply pushed by necessity, the other 2 Grots follow. The work inside the relay station requires coordination between all 3 Gretchen working in darkness, broken only by the sporadic flashing of electrical discharges. They must pull specific circuits and reroute power through pathways that were never designed for such use, their hands manipulating tools that are poorly suited for the task. Around them, the station grows hotter as power builds in the lines, the metal surfaces becoming hot enough to cook flesh. One of the other Grots panics halfway through the process, his nerve breaking as the heat becomes unbearable. He tries to retreat, tries to squeeze back through the narrow entrance, but his movements disrupt Rickett's work and cause the 3rd Grot to lose his grip on a critical component. The result is a cascade of failures as circuits overload and safeties trip, and suddenly the relay station is filled with electrical fire that turns the cramped space into an instant crematorium. Rickett experiences something in that moment, some combination of terror and rage and pure survival instinct that overrides conscious thought. His hand shoots out and grabs a heavy wrench from the dying Grot beside him, and he brings it down on the panicking Gretchen's skull with force born of desperate strength. The blow kills instantly, and the body's collapse provides just enough space for Rickett to reach the controls and complete the power reroute, even as flames lick at his fur and the stench of cooking meat fills his nostrils. When he emerges from the relay station, dragging the corpse of the panicked Grot behind him, Gripsit is there waiting with an expression that might be approval or simple acknowledgement of a job completed. The overseer takes one look at the situation, notes that the power reroute was successful despite the deaths, and makes a mark on a data slate he carries. This mark, Rickett will later learn, indicates that he has been flagged as a Gretchen worth keeping alive when possible, a designation that grants him slightly better assignments and marginally less dangerous work. The mining laser test is a tremendous success from the Orc's perspective, the weapon carving through asteroids with a beam of energy that makes the mech boys shriek with delight. From Rickett's perspective, it is simply another day of work that he has survived, another shift that has ended with him still alive while others have died. The two Grots who entered the relay station with him are added to whatever count of casualties the ship maintains, their bodies recycled into whatever use dead Gretchen serve in Orc society. But something changes in Rickett after this incident. He becomes more efficient, more focused, more willing to take risks that other Gretchen avoid. This is not courage, because courage requires an understanding of alternatives that Rickett does not possess. Rather, it is a kind of calculated ruthlessness, an understanding that the only way to improve his chances of survival is to demonstrate value that makes the Orcs want to keep him functional. He begins to volunteer for difficult tasks, not out of any desire to serve, but because difficult tasks often come with slightly better conditions for Gretchen who succeed. He watches the mech boys more carefully, learning to anticipate their needs before they express them, positioning himself to be useful before being ordered. He studies other Gretchen who have survived longer, noting the behaviors and attitudes that seem correlated with continued existence. And slowly, imperceptibly, he begins to accumulate something resembling status within the engineering section's Gretchen hierarchy. Other Grots defer to him when Gripsit is not present, recognizing that Rickett has the Overseer's favor and that crossing him might mean being assigned to more dangerous work. He uses this position to establish a small network of Gretchen who work together, watching each other's backs in the minimal way that such cooperation is possible in an environment defined by competition for survival. This network is not friendship, because friendship requires trust, and Gretchen are incapable of trust in any meaningful sense. Rather, it is a temporary alliance of convenience, a recognition that sometimes working together produces better outcomes than working alone. The Grots in Rickett's network share information about which machinery is likely to fail soon, which mech boys are in particularly violent moods, which work assignments are slightly safer than others. Time continues its inexorable march, measured in shifts and battles and the slow accumulation of scars and mutations. Rickett's body continues to change under the constant exposure to radiation and chemicals, his original form giving way to something that is recognizably Gretchen but distinctly altered. His left eye develops a secondary lens that allows him to see in complete darkness, a mutation that proves useful when working in spaces where normal vision fails. His hands grow thicker and more resistant to heat, the skin developing calluses that allow him to grasp hot surfaces without immediate injury. After a full year of service, a period of time that represents exceptional longevity for an engineering Grot, Rickett is selected for yet another assignment. This time he is brought before a mech boy named Sparkit, an Orc who specializes in maintaining the ship's weapons systems. Sparkit is looking for a personal assistant, a Gretchen who can learn the specific quirks of his custom tools and equipment, someone who might survive more than a few weeks in his service. The selection process is simple and brutal. Sparkit has gathered 10 Gretchen who have been flagged by their overseers as potentially competent, and he gives them a test. He disassembles one of his favorite weapons, a massive plasma gun that requires constant maintenance to remain functional, and scatters the components across his workshop floor. The first Grot to correctly reassemble the weapon will become his assistant. The others will be returned to their previous duties, or if they attempt to assemble the weapon incorrectly and cause damage, will be beaten to death as examples. Rickett approaches the scattered components with the same focused attention he applies to all problems. He has never assembled a plasma weapon before, but he has watched mech boys work on similar devices countless times. He understands the basic principles of how orc technology functions, the way components fit together more through faith and enthusiasm than engineering precision. His hands move quickly, but not frantically, each piece picked up and examined before being placed in position. Two other Gretchen attempt to compete, their own hands grabbing at components in a race to be first, but they work without understanding, forcing pieces together in ways that seem right, but are not. And when one of them tries to attach the power cell to an incompletely assembled chamber, the resulting discharge vaporizes both grots in a flash of superheated plasma that leaves scorch marks on the ceiling. Ricket does not react to their deaths except to adjust his position to avoid the residual heat from the blast. He continues working methodically, and when he slides the final component into place with a satisfying click, Sparkgit grunts with approval. The mech boy picks up the assembled weapon, checks its function with practiced efficiency, and then looks down at Ricket with an expression that might be respect in an orc's limited emotional range. The other surviving Gretchen are dismissed, sent back to their previous duties with expressions that suggest they understand how fortunate Ricket is to have been chosen. Being selected as a mech boy's personal assistant is one of the better fates available to Gretchen, a position that offers marginally better conditions and significantly improved chances of survival compared to general labor. Sparkgit's workshop becomes Ricket's new home, and his duties expand beyond simple fetching and carrying to include actual technical work. He learns to use orc tools, massive implements designed for hands 3 times the size of his own, adapting them to his needs through improvisation and necessity. He learns the specific sounds that Sparkgit's various projects make when they are functioning correctly versus when they are about to explode. He learns to anticipate the mech boy's moods, to know when Sparkgit wants assistance and when he wants to be left alone to work. The work is different from anything Ricket has done before, requiring a combination of technical skill and survival instinct. Mech boys are notorious for the instability of their creations, their enthusiasm for innovation outpacing their concern for safety by factors that would horrify any properly trained Imperial tech priest. Explosions are common, as are electrical discharges, chemical spills, and various forms of catastrophic failure that turn workshops into disaster zones without warning. But there is also something almost satisfying about the work in ways that Ricket cannot quite articulate. When he successfully repairs a weapon that seemed beyond repair, when he improvises a solution to a problem that has stumped Sparkgit, when he helps complete a project that makes the mech boy roar with laughter and satisfaction, something in his Gretchen brain responds with what might be called pride, if Gretchen were capable of such emotions. He also begins to understand something about orc technology that he had never fully grasped before. The machines work not because they are properly designed or correctly assembled, but because the orcs believe they should work. The Waaagh energy that permeates greenskin society acts as a kind of psychic glue that holds everything together, compensating for engineering flaws and logical inconsistencies through sheer will. And Gretchen, being part of the same genetic family, even if they are weaker and smaller, contribute to this field in their own small way. This understanding changes nothing about Ricket's circumstances, but it provides a framework for making sense of the senseless. When a gun fires despite having no obvious ammunition source, when a vehicle moves despite having no intact drivetrain, when a ship survives damage that should crack its hull open to vacuum, these things happen because enough orcs nearby believe they should happen. Reality bends around orcoid conviction with results that defy all rational analysis. Sparkgit's projects vary wildly in scope and ambition. Some are simple repairs to existing weapons, routine maintenance that keeps the ship's arsenal functional. Others are elaborate modifications, attempts to make guns shoot faster or hit harder or produce more satisfying explosions. Still others are completely new creations, weapons that exist only because Sparkit has decided they should exist and has convinced the ship's other mechs that he can build them. One such project becomes Ricket's primary focus for several months. Sparkit has conceived of a weapon he calls the boom cannon, a device that fires shells filled with unstable explosives in patterns that create cascading detonations across enemy formations. The theory, such as orc weapons theory, exists, is that each explosion will trigger the next in sequence, creating a wave of destruction that grows more powerful as it progresses. Building the boom cannon requires Ricket to work with explosives more unstable than anything he has encountered before. The shells must be assembled in specific ways to ensure they detonate in the correct sequence, and any mistake in the assembly process results in immediate catastrophic failure. Sparkit loses 3 other Gretchen assistants to premature detonations before Ricket develops a technique that allows him to handle the explosives with acceptable levels of risk. The technique involves working in very cold conditions, which slows the chemical reactions that make the explosives so unstable. Ricket constructs a small refrigerated chamber from stolen components and salvaged coolant systems, creating a workspace where he can assemble shells without immediate danger of blowing himself apart. Sparkit is impressed enough by this innovation to actually give Ricket credit for it, a recognition that is almost unprecedented in Orc-Gretchen relations. The boom cannon's first field test is scheduled for the next major engagement, whenever that might occur. In the meantime, Ricket continues his work maintaining Sparkit's various other projects and assisting with the ongoing modifications that occupy the workshop. His status has evolved to the point where other Gretchen in the ship's mech sections recognize his name, and some even seek him out with technical questions when their own overseers are unavailable or unhelpful. This accumulation of knowledge and reputation represents a kind of success that few Gretchen achieve. Ricket has survived more than 2 years in Orc service, a period that has seen thousands of other Grots emerge from breeding pits and die in various ways. His body bears the scars of countless injuries, his mind carries the weight of countless horrors witnessed, but he continues to function with a mechanical efficiency that has become his defining characteristic. Then the ship enters a system where a major battle is planned, and everything changes again. The engagement begins normally enough, with the usual preparation of weapons and positioning of crews. But this battle is different from the small skirmishes and raids that have defined the ship's recent history. This is part of a larger Waaagh, a gathering of dozens of Orc vessels come together for an assault on an Imperial world whose defenders have proven stubborn enough to earn the Greenskins' respect. Ricket watches the battle unfold from Sparkit's workshop, which provides a view through armored viewports that look out onto the void. The Orc fleet appears gradually, vessels emerging from the warp in rough formation, their hulls bristling with weapons and their engines burning with barely controlled power. The Imperial defenders respond with organized precision, their ships moving in calculated patterns that maximize their firing arcs while minimizing their exposure. The contrast between the two forces is stark. The Imperial vessels move like parts of a well-maintained machine, each component fulfilling its designed role in support of an overall strategy. The Orc fleet moves like a mob given ships, each vessel seeking glory and violence with minimal coordination beyond a shared desire to get into range and start shooting. That the Orc approach proves more effective despite its apparent chaos is another demonstration of how the Waaagh energy compensates for logical deficiencies. The battle rages for hours, then days, the void filled with enough firepower to sterilize planets being exchanged between forces that see only targets and opportunities for violence. Sparkit is in his element during combat, his hands flying over controls as he directs his various weapon systems, his voice raised in constant war cries that make the workshop walls vibrate. Ricket works alongside him, feeding ammunition and adjusting targeting systems and performing the 100 small tasks that keep the weapons firing. And then comes the moment when the boom cannon is finally ready for testing. Sparkit loads the first shell into the barrel with hands that shake with anticipation, his mechanical targeting system selecting an Imperial frigate that has separated slightly from its formation. The firing sequence begins, and Rickett finds himself holding his breath despite lacking any real investment in whether the weapon succeeds or fails. The shell launches with a sound like thunder compressed into a single instant, its trajectory visible as a streak of light against the darkness. It strikes the Imperial frigate's shields and detonates, and for a moment, nothing seems to happen. Then the second shell arrives, and the third, and suddenly the entire sequence of cascading explosions that Sparkit envisioned is happening exactly as designed. The Imperial ship's shields collapse under the overlapping detonations, its hull tears open in multiple locations, and within seconds it is breaking apart in a fireball that lights up that entire section of the battlefield. Sparkit's roar of triumph is so loud that Rickett's ears ring for minutes afterward. The mech boy grabs Rickett and lifts him off the ground, shaking him with enthusiasm that would kill a less durable creature. His face split in a grin that shows every one of his massive teeth. Other mech boys crowd into the workshop to see the weapon that just scored such an impressive kill. Their voices raised in congratulations that sound like threats, but represent genuine approval. Rickett survives the celebration through a combination of luck and agility, managing to avoid being crushed or torn apart by orcs who are too excited to remember that Gretchen are fragile. When the mech boys finally disperse to return to their own duties, he finds himself with new bruises and possibly a cracked rib, but also with something approaching satisfaction. The weapon he helped build has proven effective, and in orc society, effectiveness is the only currency that truly matters. The battle continues for another full day before the Imperial defenders withdraw, their forces too depleted to maintain the defense against the overwhelming orc numbers. The Greenskin fleet claims victory with the usual ceremonies of war cries and weapon displays, and then the long process of repairing damage and preparing for the next engagement begins. In the aftermath, Sparkit receives recognition from higher-ranking mechs for his boom cannon's success, and some of that recognition extends to Rickett as well. He is given his own small workspace within Sparkit's domain, a luxury almost unheard of for Gretchen, and access to tools and materials that allow him to begin working on small projects of his own. The other Grots in the mech sections watch this development with expressions that might be envy or resentment or simply recognition that one of their own has achieved something noteworthy. Time continues its relentless progression. Years accumulate, battles come and go, and Rickett continues to survive through a combination of competence, luck, and the cold calculation that has become his nature. His body continues to mutate under constant exposure to energies that would kill any normal creature, his form growing stronger and more resistant even as it becomes less recognizably Gretchen. His eyes adapt to see across multiple spectrums. His hands develop enough dexterity to work with components that require precision beyond normal Grot capability. His mind expands to hold technical knowledge that would fill volumes if anyone bothered to record it. He becomes, in many ways, the ideal Gretchen servant from an orc perspective. Competent enough to be useful, durable enough to last, smart enough to solve problems, but not smart enough to question orders. Other mech boys begin requesting his assistance with their projects, recognizing that Sparkit's pet Grot has developed skills worth borrowing when available. Rickett moves through the ship's mech sections with something approaching freedom, his presence tolerated and even occasionally welcomed in workshops where other Gretchen would be kicked or beaten on sight. But freedom is relative, and tolerance is not the same as respect. Rickett remains a Gretchen, a slave species whose existence has value only insofar as it serves orc interests. The bruises and burns and scars that mark his body are constant reminders of his position in the hierarchy. The casual violence he endures proof that he is property rather than person. And the knowledge that any moment might bring death through accident or orc temper or simple bad luck remains a constant background awareness that colors every thought and action. During his 5th year of service, something unprecedented happens. Sparkett is promoted to head mech of the entire ship, a position that comes with significant status and corresponding responsibilities. As part of this elevation, he is granted the authority to maintain a larger crew of Gretchen assistants, and he chooses Rickett as his primary aide. This promotion carries with it access to even better resources, assignment to even more complex projects, and marginally improved living conditions that include regular meals and slightly less exposure to immediate danger. It also brings Rickett into proximity with the ship's upper hierarchy, the nobs and war bosses who direct the vessel's strategic movements. He occasionally catches glimpses of War Boss Gutsrip during meetings where Sparkett presents new weapons or reports on ongoing projects. The War Boss is exactly what Orc mythology claims all leaders should be: massive, violent, covered in scars and trophies, radiating an aura of barely controlled aggression that makes even other Orcs wary. These glimpses into the command structure reveal something that Rickett has never fully understood before: the scope of the Waaagh itself. The ship is not merely sailing randomly through space-seeking violence, but is part of a deliberate campaign against Imperial holdings in this sector. Dozens of worlds have already fallen to the greenskin onslaught, their populations killed or enslaved, their resources looted to fuel the Orc war machine. And there are dozens more worlds still to be conquered, each one offering new opportunities for the kind of violence that Orcs consider the highest form of recreation. Rickett processes this information with the same detachment he applies to everything else. The fate of human worlds and populations means nothing to him, these beings existing in his consciousness only as abstract concepts that have no connection to his immediate reality. What matters is that the ongoing Waaghs provide steady work, consistent opportunities to demonstrate value, and therefore continued reasons for the Orcs to keep him alive and functional. But something is changing in the broader Orc society, subtle shifts that become apparent to anyone paying attention. The Waaagh is growing larger, attracting more and more Orcs from across the sector and beyond. Ships arrive from other systems, their crews eager to join what has become one of the largest greenskin mobilizations in recent memory. And with each new arrival, the psychic pressure of the Waaagh grows stronger, the collective will of millions of Orcs focused on conquest and violence, producing effects that ripple through reality itself. Rickett can feel this pressure even in his limited Gretchen consciousness, the way it makes machinery function more reliably and weapons hit harder and ships survive damage that should destroy them. It is like working in a storm where the electrical discharge in the air makes everything more intense, more immediate, more real. And he understands, in the way that Gretchen understand things they cannot articulate, that this growing Waaagh represents something dangerous even by Orc standards. The danger becomes apparent when the fleet engages an Imperial Navy battle group defending a fortress world designated Mortregard Prime. The Imperial defenders have had time to prepare, their positions heavily fortified, and their firepower concentrated to devastating effect. The initial Orc assault is repulsed with losses that would have broken any other force, dozens of ships destroyed, and thousands of Orcs killed in the opening exchanges. But the Waaagh does not break. Instead, it grows stronger, the psychic pressure building as the surviving Orcs become more determined, more aggressive, more confident that they cannot be stopped. Reality begins to warp around the battlefield in ways that defy rational explanation. Orc ships that should be drifting wrecks continue fighting with half their hulls missing. Weapons that should be out of ammunition continue firing. Warriors who should be dead continue attacking with injuries that would kill any other creature instantly. The battle for Mortregard Prime lasts for 3 months of continuous combat, a grinding attrition that consumes both sides in flames and violence. Rickett works throughout the engagement without pause, his hands flying over control panels and his body moving with mechanical efficiency as he helps keep the ship's weapons operational despite damage that would cripple any vessel not sustained by Waaagh energy. And then, on a day that begins like any other during the siege, something extraordinary happens. Rickett is working alone in a damaged weapons battery, attempting to restore function to systems that have been offline for weeks, when he discovers something hidden behind a damaged bulkhead. It is a small object, roughly spherical, made from a material that seems to absorb light rather than reflect it. The markings on its surface are not orcish, not human, not any language or design that Rickett recognizes. His first instinct is to report the find to Spark Git, to hand it over to someone who might understand what it is and what to do with it. But something stops him, some survival instinct that suggests this object represents either danger or opportunity, or possibly both. He examines it more carefully, his adapted eyes attempting to make sense of its structure, his clever hands manipulating it with care born of working with unstable explosives. The object responds to his touch, its surface shifting in ways that suggest it is not merely an artifact, but some kind of device. Patterns appear and disappear, symbols that might be writing or diagrams or something else entirely. And as Rickett studies these patterns, something extraordinary happens. He begins to understand them, not through conscious analysis or logical deduction, but through some form of direct knowledge transfer that bypasses normal learning entirely. The device is a data repository, he understands suddenly, created by the Necrons who ruled this sector millions of years before either humans or orcs existed. It contains technical information about construction and engineering principles, knowledge that could be applied to countless practical problems if accessed by someone capable of comprehending its contents. And somehow, through mechanisms that Rickett cannot begin to explain, he is comprehending those contents in ways that should be impossible for a creature of his mental capacity. He sits in that damaged weapons battery for hours, his mind expanding as it absorbs information that transforms his understanding of how technology functions. The device is teaching him not merely facts, but frameworks, not merely knowledge, but the capacity to generate new knowledge through application of underlying principles. When he finally sets the device down, his thoughts racing with possibilities, he has become something fundamentally different from what he was before. The change is not immediately apparent to outside observers. Rickett continues his duties without obvious alteration, his behavior remaining within acceptable parameters for a Gretchen assistant. But internally, everything has changed. He now sees patterns in the ship's systems that he never noticed before, understands relationships between components that were previously opaque, recognizes inefficiencies and opportunities for improvement that are invisible to the mechs who supposedly command technical expertise. And most importantly, he begins to understand that his position is not inevitable, that Gretchen's servitude is not some fundamental law of reality, but simply the current arrangement of power in Orc society. This understanding does not immediately translate into action, because Rickett is still sufficiently Gretchen to recognize that individual rebellion against the entire structure of Orc authority would be suicidal. But it plants seeds in his mind, possibilities that grow in the darkness of his thoughts while he continues to outwardly perform his assigned role. The siege of Mortregard Prime finally ends when the Imperial defenders withdraw their remaining forces, abandoning the world rather than seeing it completely destroyed in continued fighting. The Orc fleet claims victory in the usual manner, and war boss Gutsrip announces plans for the next target in his campaign of conquest. The ship undergoes repairs and resupply, battle damage is addressed, and the cycle of preparation for the next engagement begins. But for Rickett, everything has changed. He begins making small modifications to his workspace, alterations so subtle that even Sparkit fails to notice them. He starts collecting materials that might prove useful later, components and tools that he hides in locations known only to himself. He begins studying the ship's Gretchen population with new eyes, identifying individuals who have survived long enough to develop skills or intelligence or simply the kind of ruthlessness that might prove valuable. This is not revolution in any organized sense. Rickett has no grand plan, no vision of Gretchen liberation, no desire to overthrow Orc society and establish some alternative social order. He simply recognizes that his increased knowledge represents a form of power, and that power might be used to improve his circumstances in ways that were previously impossible. The specifics can be determined later, when opportunities present themselves, which they inevitably will in an environment as chaotic as an Orc warship. Years continue to pass. The Waaagh rolls across the sector like a green tide, consuming worlds and populations in its endless hunger for violence. Rickett continues his service to Sparkit, his outward behavior remaining exemplary, even as his inner thoughts grow increasingly complex. He uses his technical knowledge to make improvements to various systems throughout the ship, modifications that increase efficiency without drawing attention to their source. He gradually builds a network of Gretchen throughout the vessel who owe him favors or recognize his competence, creating connections that might prove valuable if circumstances shift in favorable directions. And slowly, imperceptibly, the balance of power in certain sections of the ship begins to change. Gretchen, who work under Rickett's indirect guidance, become slightly more efficient, slightly more organized, slightly more capable of resisting the casual violence that normally defines Orc-Grot relations. The changes are too subtle to trigger Orc responses, too small to be noticed by beings focused on larger matters of warfare and conquest. But they accumulate over time like water wearing away stone. And in the dark spaces of the ship where Gretchen gather away from Orc supervision, words begin to circulate about a Grot who knows things that other Grots do not, who can solve problems that seem unsolvable, who has survived longer than should be possible through something beyond mere luck. These words carry a weight that transcends their simple meanings, planting ideas in other Gretchen minds, just as the Necron device planted ideas in Rickett's mind. The life of an Orc Grot remains horrifying by any reasonable measure. Each day brings pain and degradation and the constant threat of sudden death. Each shift involves work that breaks the body and deadens the mind through sheer, repetitive brutality. Each interaction with Orcs carries the risk of violence dispensed with casual indifference to Gretchen's suffering. But for Rickett, something has changed in fundamental ways. His existence is no longer defined entirely by survival, his consciousness no longer limited entirely to immediate circumstances. He has glimpsed possibilities beyond the narrow confines of Gretchen servitude. Not escape exactly, but perhaps something like agency within the constraints that still bind him. Whether those possibilities will lead anywhere beyond his own eventual death remains uncertain, because the universe cares nothing for the ambitions of creatures as small and weak as Gretchen. Yet he continues to survive, continues to work, continues to think his hidden thoughts while performing his assigned duties with mechanical precision. And in the endless darkness between stars, aboard a ship that should not exist but does through the power of collective Orc belief, one Gretchen carries knowledge that might one day change everything, or might simply die with him when circumstances finally catch up with luck and skill and ruthless calculation. The Waaagh continues its inexorable progress. Worlds burn, populations are enslaved or exterminated, and the green tide of Orcish conquest rolls ever onward. And through it all, one Grot named Rickett works in the shadows, his true thoughts hidden behind a mask of servile competence, waiting for opportunities that may never come while preparing for possibilities that seem impossible. This is the reality of Gretchen existence in Warhammer 40,000. Not noble resistance or tragic heroism, but simple survival through whatever means present themselves, intelligence applied to problems too immediate for philosophy. Life continued through another day that might be the last. And if that life seems horrifying to creatures fortunate enough to live in circumstances that allow for concepts like dignity or freedom or self-determination, well, those concepts have no meaning in a galaxy where entire species serve as cannon fodder in wars they did not choose to fight. The ship sails on through the void, its engines burning with fires that should consume it, but do not. And deep within its mechanical guts, amid the noise and heat and endless violence that define Orc existence, one Gretchen continues the work that has become his life. Each moment a small victory of survival against odds that make survival seem like defiance. Whether that defiance means anything in the grand scheme of galactic conflict remains to be seen, because the future is uncertain and the universe is vast, and the only guarantee is that tomorrow will bring more of what today has brought. Pain and work and the slim chance of seeing another sunrise in a cosmos that offers nothing else to those who exist at the bottom of every hierarchy that matters. And so Rickett endures, his story a small thread in the vast tapestry of war and suffering that is Warhammer 40,000, where the grim darkness of the far future offers no hope to those who dare to dream of better circumstances. Yet still he works, still he thinks, still he survives in defiance of all logic and reason. Because that is what Gretchen do, what they have always done, what they will continue to do until the last stars burn out or the universe itself collapses. They endure through whatever means available, their existence a testament not to strength or nobility or any quality that civilizations value, but simply to the stubborn persistence of life in forms that refuse to die, no matter how terrible the conditions they must bear. The horrifying life of an Orc Grot continues without end, a cycle of servitude and suffering that spans generations of Gretchen who emerge from spore and return to dust, with nothing to show for their brief existence except perhaps the continued functioning of Orc society. And if one particular Grot has developed thoughts that transcend that cycle, well, the universe will determine whether those thoughts matter or whether they will simply vanish with him when his luck finally runs out and he becomes another statistic in the endless count of Gretchen casualties that no one bothers to record. Until then, there is only work and survival, and the faint possibility that knowledge might somehow matter in a universe that has never valued intelligence over strength or wisdom, over violence or hope, over the grim reality that defines existence for billions of beings ground beneath the machinery of eternal war.